Before the first blush of dawn crept over Silverhorn's jagged skyline, the mountain lay draped in stillness, a vast cathedral of ice and stone. Frost clung like crystals to every outcropping, and the only sound was the whisper of wind threading through ancient pines. Atop a narrow ledge 40 feet above the valley floor, Aurelia the Ibex stood statue-still, her curved horns etched with frost, nostrils flaring in the crisp air. Below her, a meadow of short alpine grasses poked through the snow, each blade coated in hoarfrost that glittered like a field of diamonds as the sky slowly lightened. Aurelia's muscles tensed as she watched the horizon pale from inky blue to lavender, then to a soft rose. She shifted her weight from one cloven hoof to the other, testing the ledge's frozen surface. Since her own first wobbly steps as a kid, she had learned every nuance of this ledge, how the wind courted its edge and how the snow settled in shallow drifts against the rock. This was her homeland, shaped by avalanches and spring thaws, by generations of ibex that had carved their living into contours too sheer for most creatures to dare. Down the slope, her fawn Orion thundered with youthful exuberance, charging through knee-deep drifts. Each enthusiastic bound flung snow into a shimmering arc, and the fawn's bright eyes gleamed with discovery. He pawed at frozen clumps of moss, sending fragments skittering like startled lizards, and bleated in delight when he uncovered tufts of soft grass. To Aurelia, his antics were a balm to the mountain's austere grandeur, proof that life thrived even in the harshest heights. She nuzzled him gently, her warm breath melting frost on his muzzle. He leaped back in playful protest, skidding on a bank of slush before regaining his footing with all the clumsy grace of youth. Aurelia lowered her head to brush his shoulder with her horns, reminding him that the high slopes demanded respect even in moments of joy. As the sun's first rays touched the tips of distant spires, Aurelia led Orion toward a cluster of ice-worn boulders. Here, sheltered from the worst of the wind, verdant patches of grass peeked through the snowpack. She grazed with deliberate care, tearing at the tough blades and rolling them between her teeth to extract every ounce of nourishment. Orion mimicked her movements, though his smaller teeth struggled to grasp the icy stalks. He stamped in frustration until Aurelia guided him to a softer patch, where warmth from the sun had thawed the earth, an oasis in a sea of white. All around, life stirred. A pair of snowbuntings flitted from rock to rock, their white plumage blending seamlessly with the frost. An ermine, its winter coat as white as the snow itself, darted across the ledge in pursuit of a hidden bull. Far below, a ribbon of dark water escaped a partially frozen stream, promising relief to any creature brave enough to descend for a drink. For Aurelia, these signs were the mountain's heartbeat, the subtle rhythms that told her when to feed, when to rest, and when to prepare for the seasons ahead. She lifted her head, nostrils quivering as she inhaled a hint of warmth on the breeze. Today's gentle thaw felt earlier than usual. A frown creased her brow, the memory of last winter's late-season avalanche still lingered, a wall of snow that had reshaped entire meadows and claimed the lives of several ibex. Instinct stirred warily within her, warning that beauty often masked danger. Yet for now, the slopes remained tranquil. Aurelia dipped her horns into a shallow dribble of meltwater seeping from a crevice, savoring its crisp purity. Orion followed, drinking eagerly until his sides heaved with exertion. As he lapped, Aurelia scanned the high ridges where morning light painted glacier teeth in brilliant white. They were breathtaking, a promise of clear skies and abundance, but also reminder of the precarious world they inhabited, where a single crack could unleash devastation. Drawing a slow breath, Aurelia lifted her chin to the sky and marked the day's course. She would lead Orion along the gentler ridgeline to a hollow where spring-green forbs pushed through thawing snow. There they would linger until the sun climbed too high and the risk of wet slopes increased. In her mind, she mapped each step, each safe stone, each hidden pocket of reliable footing. With a final, lingering glance at the valley far below, still shrouded in pre-dawn shadows, Aurelia turned, tail flicking once in reassurance, and began a sure-footed descent. Orion bounded after her, heedless of caution but secure in the knowledge that his mother knew every secret of these heights. As they started their journey across the quiet slopes of Silverhorn, the mountain exhaled in a breath of wind, as if blessing their passage and sealing a mother's vow. Come avalanche or spring thaw, she would never let her fawn fall alone. The morning sun climbed higher, transforming the rosy glow of dawn into a fierce, white brilliance that danced across the slopes of Silverhorn. Aurelia paused on a narrow outcrop, nostrils flaring as she inhaled the warmer air. The sharp scent of melting snow mingled with the musk of alpine grasses, hinting at an unusually rapid thaw. Beneath her hooves, the pristine snowpack gave faint, hollow echoes, an unsettling drumbeat under the pounding sun. Her keen eyes scanned the slope above, where drifts lay in precarious overhangs, their edges softened by the midday warmth. Below, Orion tumbled in an exuberant spiral, his tiny hooves kicking clouds of crystal and powder into the air. Aurelia lowered her head to nudge him toward a patch of green nestled behind a boulder, but as she did, she caught a sudden shift in the mountainside, an imperceptible quiver that rippled through the ledge. The fawn's bleat died on his lips, ears flattening against his neck. Ahead of them, a family of marmots erupted from a hidden den, scampering for higher ground in a frantic, chattering panic. Even the chuffs wheeling overhead veered off course, their discordant cries slicing the stillness like a knife. Aurelia's muscles coiled. She knew these signals well. The hollow thumps and fleeing creatures meant the snowpack was failing. She stamped her hoof firmly on the icy ledge and emitted her low warning call, a resonant bellow that echoed against distant ridges. Immediately, Orion froze, his bright eyes searching hers for guidance. Aurelia swept a protective flank around him, then turned to face the slope's steep incline, every sinew taut with readiness. Moments later came the crack, a single, sharp report that exploded through the mountain air like rifle fire. Aurelia's heart thundered as she glimpsed the fracture line snaking across the snowfield, widening with terrifying speed. Chunks of snow peeled away, tumbling downward in slow motion before gathering momentum into a cascade of white. The air filled with the roar of shifting ice and the roar of falling rock. Aurelia lunged laterally, hauling Orion against her flank and leaping toward a safe recess in the cliff wall, narrowly outrunning the wall of snow that thundered past behind them. When the avalanche's fury subsided into a brutal hush, Aurelia stood panting on an exposed ledge, her coat dusted white with snow spray. Below her, the mountain had shed its mantle, revealing a scar of bare rock and ice. And on a remnant shelf, Orion trembled, ears back, eyes wide with shock, but uninjured. Aurelia lowered her head in relief, brushing his flank with her horns, and let out a gentle bleat. In that tense moment, the mountain's voice had spoken in thunderous warning. Aurelia, mother and guardian of the high country, had heeded it, and now, with danger still lurking, she would lead her fawn to firmer ground before the thaw could claim another life. A sudden, bone-shaking crack split the still mountain air, a sound like a colossal tree snapped in two. Aurelia's heart slammed against her ribs as she looked uphill to see the snowpack rippling, its surface bulging like a frozen wave about to break. In that instant, time seemed to slow, the first flakes sheared free at the cornice's edge, tumbling in slow motion before gathering into an ever-widening cascade of white. Orion, run, she bellowed, voice straining to be heard over the thunder that exploded across the slopes. The vast wall of snow pitched downward, roaring like an ancient beast released. Aurelia lunged laterally, her hooves skidding on the ice ledge, horns grazing the rock as she hauled Orion against her flank. Beneath the avalanche's roar, the mountain seemed to shudder, and the sun-blanched snow became a blur of swirling powder and flying ice shards. Aurelia planted her feet as firmly as she could, but the force of the onrush yanked at her coat and sent a hail of icy fragments rattling against her sides. She closed her eyes against the blinding spray, every muscle trembling with the impact. Somewhere in the cacophony, she heard Orion's terrified bleat, cut short by the roar of snow and rock grinding together like colossal machinery. And then, silence. The avalanche spent itself, the thunderous torrent reduced to a distant hiss and the crackling of settling debris. Aurelia opened her eyes to a transformed world, where once had been a gentle slope lay a devastating scar of bare granite and packed snow. She blinked through the settling dust, panting, ears ringing, her coat dusted white with frozen spray. Instinct propelled her forward. Aurelia peered over the edge of the ledge, her heart leaping into her throat. Far below, on a narrow shelf of shattered ice, where the avalanche's fury had slowed, lay Orion, shaking, eyes wide, but miraculously unharmed. The ground between them was a jumble of ragged ice blocks and loose scree, a maze carved by the avalanche's passage. Aurelia's breath hitched as she pressed her nose to the air, drawing in the sharp scent of churned snow and crushed moss. She lowered her head and let out a soft, coaxing bleat, her voice tender but urgent. Orion answered with a fragile bleat of his own, relief rippling through Aurelia's chest. Without a second's hesitation, she backed away from the ledge's edge, drawing her muscles taut for the perilous descent. The avalanche's fury had passed, but the mountainside remained treacherous. With her fawn's life still hanging in the balance, Aurelia braced herself against the icy wind and prepared to climb down into the broken heart of Silverhorn. Aurelia pressed her flank against the wind-cut cliff, nostrils flaring as she studied the shattered chasm below. The avalanche had carved a jagged gash across the mountainside, a tangle of ice blocks, fractured boulders, and slick channels where meltwater carved fresh rivulets. To reach Orion, she would have to thread her way down a path no ibex or beast had walked before. She hopped onto the first ice slab, testing its purchase with a careful clack of her hooves. It wobbled beneath her weight, but held. Below, bits of shattered snow slid off at impossibly steep angles, and cold air whispered up from the fissure. Aurelia inched along a narrow ledge only as wide as her hoof, each step measured, every muscle coiled to react if the ground gave way. Halfway down, she spotted a cluster of marmots, small, stout bodies huddled in a crevice's shadow. Recognizing their alpine wisdom, Aurelia stamped her foreleg in greeting. The marmots chirped urgently, scurrying out onto the ice and hopping across broken stones to indicate a safer route, a sloping ramp of packed snow that slanted gently toward Orion's ledge. Trusting their guidance, she followed, carefully crossing the ramp as the marmots darted ahead to test each footfall. But the terrain's treachery was unrelenting. Partway down the ramp, a sudden crack rattled the surface as a hidden slab broke loose. Aurelia froze, heart pounding, before leaping back to solid rock. Snow cascaded into the depths with a deafening roar, sending shards of ice clattering like glass. Her heart thundered with the realization that the mountain would give no quarter. Aurelia shook the fear from her limbs and resumed her descent, now guided by the sharp cries of a lone chuff. The black bird wheeled overhead, its piercing squawks drawing Aurelia's eye to a narrow ice bridge spanning the chasm. She exhaled a slow breath and picked her way across bosom close to the rock face, legs splayed for balance, until at last she reached the far side. There, crouched beneath a rocky overhang, she found the lynx, a watchful sentinel whose amber eyes regarded her with cautious respect. The lynx slipped aside to reveal a hidden crevice carved into the cliff, a sheltered chute that would lead her directly to Orion's ledge. Aurelia squeezed through, flanks scraping the stone, until the rock spit her out onto the final stretch of fractured ice. Below her, Orion lay curled on a narrow shelf, trembling but wary. Aurelia's heart surged with relief as she picked her way down the last 10 feet of slick ice. With a final bounding leap, she landed beside him, pressing her warmth into his cold body. Together, they turned their backs on the avalanche's scar and began the ascent to safety, every step a tribute to the quiet alliances and unyielding resolve that had guided them across the broken ice. Aurelia pressed her shoulder against Orion's trembling flank as they paused on the final narrow ledge beneath the avalanche's scar. The wind here funneled through the chasm in icy gusts, carrying the raw scent of crushed rock and upthrust ice. Orion's legs, still unsteady from terror and exposure, quivered against the sheer drop. Aurelia dipped her muzzle, brushing his ear with warm breath. "Steady now," she seemed to murmur, her steady presence a silent anchor. Gathering her courage, Orion inhaled deeply and placed a tentative hoof on the first step of the ascent. The climb back began with cautious precision. Aurelia led, testing each footfall on brittle ice and wind-polished stone, her horns occasionally scraping the rock for balance. Orion followed in her hoofprints, pressing close behind to feel the firm ground she'd already judged safe. Above them, the chuff's distant cry echoed once more, a herald that the mountain's watchful eye remained upon them. Higher still, a pair of alpine chuffs alighted on a cobweb of frost-laced branches, their fluttering wings reminding Orion to lift his head and keep moving upward. Midway up the fractured slope, Aurelia detected a hidden fissure where crystal-clear meltwater trickled in a slender stream across the rock. She led Orion to the pool's edge, and he lapped gratefully at the cool water, quenching his parched throat. In that brief respite, the late afternoon sun broke through ragged clouds, illuminating the snow dust that swirled around them like suspended diamonds. Aurelia's eyes reflected resolve. Tomorrow she would seek a gentler alpine pasture, but today her single purpose was safe passage home. Their path then wound across a tilted slab of slate-gray rock, polished smooth by centuries of avalanches. A misstep here would send them plunging into the chasm, but Aurelia moved with unwavering sure-footed grace. Orion mirrored her every movement, his initial hesitation replaced by growing confidence. As they gained altitude, the sounds of the lower dale, faint calls of marmots, the distant rush of the stream grew faint, replaced by the hush of the high country. At last, they crested the ridge above the avalanche's reach. Before them lay the meadow Aurelia had scouted that very morning. Tender green grasses pushed through fresh snow, and sheltered pockets offered safe grazing. Orion bounded forward, snuffling eagerly at the tender shoots, while Aurelia nuzzled him in pride and relief. The mountain's silent slopes had tested them, but they emerged intact, united by a bond forged in peril. As dusk painted the peaks in deep violet and rose, Aurelia and Orion settled beside a cluster of wind-whipped boulders. The fawn curled against his mother's flank, eyes heavy with exhaustion yet bright with newfound strength. Aurelia watched the first stars appear overhead, each a cold beacon in the twilight sky. In that moment of peaceful reunion, she felt the mountain's heartbeat slow around them, an unspoken blessing that, in the face of nature's fiercest trials, a mother's love and a fawn's trust could conquer even the most crushing avalanche.